All right, we are back with more NBA coverage, and in this one, there are more developments in general free agency and other news around the league. So, to get straight to it, the Lakers would re sign Jaxson Hayes to a 1 year contract shortly after signing DeAndre Ayton to a 2 year deal. And I did not think, given the way his season ended, that he would be given another chance. But at the same time, with them kind of shoring up that position, supposedly by getting DeAndre Ayton, having him come off the bench isn't necessarily a bad thing. Now, while I could go over his numbers for last season, I could tell you right now that they don't portray the entire story for him. I mean, in the games directly following Luka Doncic's arrival to the organization and what is still one of the most surprising moves in NBA history, you kind of saw the full potential he had. He looked to be a center that fit that Lakers offense perfectly. All they needed him to do in those moments was be a lob threat and just a high energy center in his role. And he played that to perfection in at least those first few games. I mean, just put together some very strong performances with efficient shooting and also just being somewhat of a defensive force at times while not commanding the ball whatsoever. Lakers fans were truly believing that if he could sustain that level of play, that he would change the entire complexion of their season. I mean, the Doncic trade already made them out to be supposed championship contenders, but that was going to be another key piece towards a potential run for them. The opposite ended up being true for Jaxson Hayes for most of the season surrounding just that small sample size. Because when it came down to it, he was mostly unplayable down the stretch. And it was just not a good sign to watch from his perspective and as the general fan. His defensive, skill set, while he was able to, hound down players for a few blocks at a time, and while he could get you the occasional rebound, he's one of the weakest centers defensively in the NBA, and teams were able to exploit that at will. Then also, when it came to the offensive side of the ball, if he wasn't catching lobs or getting the occasional layup on a smaller guard at the rim, the limits in his game were clear. He can't space the floor at all. He doesn't have a mid-range shot. And even, when you try to put him in the post, though his frame should provide a mismatch of sorts, he's just not adept at that portion of his game at all. And it got to the point where, as we were nearing the playoffs, he started getting less and less playing time. To the point where ultimately, in the most important game of the season, in a game in which ended up being the Lakers' final one of the year, he got benched and didn't play a single minute. To go from a potential fan favorite starting center to not even logging a single minute in the most pivotal game of the season to this point for that organization. It's just not a good sign to watch when you're looking at a player of Jaxson Hayes' caliber. And again, he was given so much opportunities to perform to the point where it might have hurt the team. He's a younger center, so you're trying to bring him along, hoping that he can progress into something special, when in reality, 35 games started last year were the most he's ever started in any single season. And it made up a great percentage of the total games he played in the year, which is very abnormal for him. So to expect him to come along in this way might have been rushed. But at the same time, they had no one else. And that's why this signing is so key. When you had to rely on Jaxson Hayes last year, which was more often than not, he's not going to be able to contribute well enough for you. Like some of these games, they were looking for him to expand his game, expand his skill set for just a little bit, add another dimension to his play at center that could give the core stars of the team some time to rest and some room for error. But it got to the point where they couldn't even rely on him, and they just wanted to play out their entire roster, based on their talent level, by having just the best 5 out there. And they got exhausted in that game and ultimately lost in the first round to the Timberwolves in 5 games because of it. However, when you allow him to do what he does best in coming off the bench as a high energy death piece, that's not a truly bad thing. And that's the role that he's going to take on. Not only, given that he's got a 1-year deal, but also just having that kind of move pulled by JJ Redick at the very end of the season speaks volumes and sends a loud message towards Jaxson Hayes' way. That, unless prompted to, with any injury or so, they're not going to ask Jaxson Hayes to do as much as he did last season. But if he can give them similar production off the bench, it just reinforces the amount of depth they have on their bench to at least acquiesce the current stars already there and try to see if they can make the most out of this season. So it's a solid signing, but Jaxson Hayes has certainly, even in this smaller role, got quite a lot to prove. I will not lie to you. The Magic would re-sign Moritz Wagner on a 1-year, $5 million deal. And this also makes tremendous sense. He's had his longest tenure with any one team in Orlando, being there since the trade deadline in the 2020-21 season. And he's had his most success there. He hasn't started a whole bunch of games, but to average 10.5 points per game on 53.7% shooting from the field, along with 33.2% shooting from deep, and grabbing 4.3 rebounds a game as well. Those are by far the best numbers he's had with any one team. And last year, he was on pace for some career highs, but his season was cut short due to injury, and he ended up appearing in just 30. Missed the entire rest of the season with a lower body injury. As unfortunate as that was, in the limited action that he did have, he was producing at a pretty efficient rate. 56.2% shooting from the field to go along with a career high 36% shooting from deep. That was going to just change the entire landscape of the team for this season. They needed as much shooting as they could get. And to lose out on a guy in Moritz Wagner who was at least giving them above league average contributions from downtown. That could have helped them out tremendously. Also, the way that Moritz Wagner has been utilized in Orlando is kind of a complimentary backup to Wendell Carter Jr. Now, I've seen Wendell Carter Jr. take some threes and even make some on occasion, but he seems to be more of, I guess, an all-around center who does have limited spacing. Like, yeah, he can shoot a few threes for you, but his job is mostly to provide the two-way play on the interior. Moritz Wagner can also do a little bit of that, but does open up the entire floor for them when he's on the court. And that's proven by the numbers, that's proven by the eye test. And that's proven by every single stat line you can think of regarding shooting after this game against the Heat on December 21st. Like, in every single game after that, it was just a struggle for them to make these shots. Like, how many times in that stretch did I mention when going over the recaps for these games that they shot somewhere around 20 to 30% from the field, from that range? Like, that's just unacceptable. And they thought that they could last long enough that way. You know, Moritz Wagner is in the middle of his prime, and, you know, to just have him around as a player that can do this for you on the bench is also good. Also, in having a kind of signing like this, it does, whether indirectly or directly, keep Franz Wagner interested in re-signing with you as well. Because his contract is probably going to be worth more, and it's probably on the way very soon for him. So, any sort of leverage that you can gain, if you're the Magic organization, in terms of being able to acquire him for the long term, you'll use it to the best of your advantage. And though they may not necessarily have this at the priority, or as a priority in their mind, I'm sure that somewhere in the back of it, they're thinking about this being a potential play for keeping both of the Wagner brothers on the squad at this time. The Nuggets situation brewing between that front office and Jonas Valanciunas has taken a pretty interesting turn, because he would make it known sometime last week that he apparently didn't want to play for the Nuggets, even with the given contract. He wanted instead to go to Greece and play with the Panathinaikos BC basketball team there. Why exactly? I'm not incredibly sure. But I mean, hey, you know, if you're in a position where you can take advantage of playing overseas, even if, you know, if you're a legitimate NBA player, you're likely going to be playing in the league. That's not something that always tends to stop people. You know, there have been multiple people who have been established NBA players making that transition overseas and playing with different basketball leagues there. It's not uncommon to see it, but it wasn't a pretty interesting situation to see Valanciunas just ask for this instead of taking on what is honestly a pretty good opportunity. Like, again, I don't know exactly what the motivation is, but man, I figure you'd want to take advantage of this. And honestly, the Nuggets front office is thinking so too. Because as Jonas Valanciunas is stating that he wants to head overseas and play, the Nuggets are essentially saying that they aren't going to let him do this, and that they will make sure that he honors his contract with the team. Now again, it's a short-term deal anyways, in their mind. So it's like, Why go over there when we paid you to play for us, even in a limited role? And it's going to be interesting to see how that gets settled. Because it seems like both of these sides are honestly going to be stuck in their ways. How are you really going to convince Valanciunas, a player who is obviously played overseas before with Lithuania? How are you going to convince him to want to play for this squad while coming off the bench rather than go back overseas and maybe just have that time to himself or spend that time amongst people of which he might be more familiar with? Also, though, the Nuggets are looking at this and saying, like, yo, you're 33, bro. You're 33 years old. How in the world are you going to try to do this to us now? Like, in 2 years, when his contract is up, then shit. I mean, why not just wait till then? If you're looking at this from the Nuggets perspective, like, just serve your time here. Although this isn't anything like a prison. Just play for our organization. Play with one of the best players in the world in Nikola Jokic, and everything is going to be fine. There are going to be a lot of different elements that creep up into this, because it just, in some cases, for Valanciunas, depending on his motivations, they may go a lot deeper than any sort of basketball-related reason. But again, until more comes out about the situation, we truly don't know what that looks like for him. Earlier last week, the Wizards would trade for Cam Whitmore and give the Rockets 2 second-round picks. For the Rockets, honestly, they'll take on as much draft capital as they can get, because in making that Kevin Durant trade, you are trying to win now. That has been made clear by every single member of that organization, whether it be the front office, whether it be the coach in Ime Udoka. They're very clear on their motivations for this season and their overall vision for how things are slated to go. And, you know, to have any sort of capital in your back pocket in the pursuit of this will help, even if they are second rounders. As for Cameron Whitmore, it is tough to see. You know, he's been in the league for 2 seasons, and he's put up some solid numbers. But opportunity in Houston has been fleeting, to say the least. Like, he has only started in 5 games out of the 98 he's played in. And we're not even factoring the amount of DNPs he's probably gotten over the course of this time. We're not factoring in the amount of time he's spent in the G League as a two-way player on occasion. It just hasn't been there. And then you have the Rockets going in this offseason and re-signing Jaxson Tate, which I did not originally report, but they signed him to a short-term deal. They get Dorian Finney-Smith out of free agency, and they draft a couple of wing players as well. So you just have all this wing talent at the small forward position, and that leaves even less room for Cameron Whitmore to do much of anything with this team. You know, the Wizards are in a similar spot, but at the same time, all of these small forwards that they have here are not players that will hinder Cameron Whitmore's opportunity as much as the Rockets would. I mean, when you look at it, they last season had Justin Champagnie, Corey Kispert's not even with them anymore, but Justin Champagnie, Bilal Coulibaly, Jalen Martin, and Chris Middleton. Again, some of these people are on their way out of the door. Like, Middleton is going to stay there for next season, but he hasn't given them an opportunity to grant him a contract extension. So there's no telling what he's going to do in just a year from now. Coulibaly's a good player, but his three-point shooting leaves a little bit to be desired, and even in the limited minutes he's gotten, you've had Cam Whitmore outperform him in that metric by a country mile. Keyshawn George can technically be a wing as well, and honestly, that's one that you'll keep as a defensive force. I can understand that. Like, Chris Middleton will get his chance, and, Champagnie, his role could afford to diminish. Like, he did have some games where he went ballistic from the field in general, but he's not a starting level small forward. So he shouldn't be treated as such. But again, the Wizards tend to do this. But in having a young guy like Cam Whitmore there, again, opportunities are abound for him. They can do whatever they please with him. And it's homecoming for him. He's actually from Maryland, which I originally did not know. So you gotta respect that as well. That should motivate them to at least include him in the rotation. And he's a young player. Like, even if he needs to spend time developing a little bit, he's got that time. He's only 21 years old as of today. It's literally his birthday as I'm talking about this. So, even though it's tough for him to get traded so quickly in his career, at the same time, coming to what is essentially his home state, his native state, and being able to don that uniform for at least the next few seasons in his career, that's honestly a trade he might be willing to accept. And the Rockets, again, they're going for a more competitive approach this season. Their forward talent is already established for the most part. They just did not have that much room for Cam Whitmore, so it was better to just let him get a change of scenery and not allow him to continue wasting away on your bench like this. Earlier last week, the Grizzlies would trade center Jay Huff to Indiana in exchange for a second-round pick and also a second-round pick swap. Again, Grizzlies are kind of in a similar boat. They aren't... honestly, their timeline could look a little different, but in getting back all the draft capital they did for Desmond Bane and now being able to get a couple more picks for Jay Huff, you can see them trying to establish their vault of potential assets in the future. And if they're leaning towards a potential rebuild or just not contending for the playoffs at all, again, having that in your back pocket won't hurt you. You can afford to move on from Jay Huff in this situation then as well, because you already have Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey there. And for Jay Huff, more opportunities were granted to him than ever before. Like, this is just very weird to see for him. This is his fifth team in as many seasons. He's played for 4 and yet hasn't even played in 100 overall games yet. But last year did see the best overall production for him. He averaged 6.9 points across 64 games, which would definitely set a career high in terms of total points. He also shot 51.5% from the field while shooting 40.5% from deep. Also grabbing 2 rebounds a game. Now, by no means do I really think that he's a good center right now. Because, honestly, he's been a career backup for this entire time. And he hasn't even been remotely healthy. When we're talking about playing 95 total games in a 4-year career that should see him, obviously, it's not perfect, but he would have at least by this point played in a possible 328 ball games. So just 95? The durability aspect of this could be scary. And especially when we're looking at an Indiana team that is already dealing with a depleted point guard's position, even though, of course, they do have the players to fulfill that role. But Halliburton is just he's just such a floor general and the true engine to that team and especially that offense. They will severely miss him already. So that's a huge loss as it is. And you've now lost Miles Turner. So you don't really have a true center on your team as it stands right now to this point. Which means that Jay Huff could be your starter. Unless they are keeping around Thomas Bryant or Tony Bradley, which honestly I haven't heard any update on. I can't imagine that both of them are staying. And if Jay Huff does become the starter with a greater opportunity and with more touches, you could see his production balloon up next season, given how things are going to trend for the Pacers. But I'd still question it a little bit, because that is just not a good string of availability, honestly. So you're going to rely on him to start when he has barely done it before and then hasn't even played in a reasonable amount of games every season. It's just kind of rough. The Grizzlies, in losing Jay Huff, though, would sign a bit of an older but more well-rounded center in Jock Landale to a short-term deal as well. And I do like it for them. Like, he can shoot well from the field, of course. And he did also shoot 42.3% from the three-point line last season, even though that's not the best aspect of his game. But he does provide you with a lot more defensive intensity and effort off the bench than Jay Huff did at all last season. And that's going to go a long way for a team in Memphis that is trying to change their entire identity in many ways. They are still fairly young, but that window is closing in so many ways. So to try to balance that out with as much veteran talent as you can is certainly important. In Jock Landale, with him going on 30 years old, as this kind of center who's just going to be coming off the bench, I guess, in place of Zach Edey, and getting a little more physical with you on that defensive side of the ball, while also being able to extend as many possessions for the Grizzlies as he can. Like, that's going to be a good combo. At least in theory, it should be. But we won't know until we get into the thick of the regular season. In any case, man, Jock Landale, it's a grand opportunity for him. This would be his fourth team in now 5 different seasons as well. But I think this could pay off for him. We'll see. We got the official release just before Independence Day on the full Kevin Durant trade that now involves an NBA record 7 NBA teams. And I do have a page here on an article from CBS Sports that has the full details of the trade and what every team is getting. So, to get into it, the Rockets would still get Kevin Durant and Clint Capella. That's just going to be how it is. I guess, again, they had to choose between Finney-Smith or Capella for this to, restructure everything in their mid-level exception, and they would elect for Clint. But in this, they could retain him as long as they just make all the right plays here. And that's what it would take. So the Suns would still get Jalen Green and Dillon Brooks, the draft rights to Kaman Mawach and Rasheer Fleming, the draft rights to Kobe Brea as well from the Warriors. Daquan Plowden, a backup reserve guard for the Hawks, a 2026 second rounder and a 2032 second rounder. On the Nets side, they would get a 2026 second rounder and a 2030 second rounder. The Warriors would still get the draft rights to Alex Tui from the Suns, and they would also gain back the draft rights to Jaime Mashack. I'm here for it. Again, as I stated in the draft recap, he is a bit more defensive minded, so it might take him some time to develop as an offensive minded player in the league. It's definitely going to take extra work considering that he was a senior last year. At that stage of your college career, you are what you are, but in NBA terms, you're still young enough to learn a few more things. Hopefully that can come together for Jaime Mashack, but there's a good foundation there. The Hawks in this would get David Roddy from the Rockets. Now, if you remember, they had David Roddy for a portion of last season and then traded him to the Suns. So then he goes to the Rockets, I guess, just randomly, and then the Hawks take him back. I don't necessarily know why that was. Like, do you figure that you really need him? I don't really see it. But they would also get a 2031 second rounder in cash. The Lakers would officially get the draft rights to Adu Thoreau in cash as well. And the Timberwolves would get the draft rights to Rocco Zukowski from Australia, a 2026 second rounder, a 2032 second rounder in cash as well. So, the initial, pre-report on this deal was right. It mostly involved recent draftees, and it didn't involve major player movement outside of the names already detailed in the original report. But to make things work monetarily and contractually, they had to shift around some of the players' draft rights because some of these players are going to be looking for rookie deals that might cost a little too much. And the assets as well, while not as desirable right now, could just add to the amount of draft capital that other teams could utilize in other trades. And so I guess from that perspective, they were a little desired. But it's still just crazy to see how all of that works together. And hey, the Rockets, in the midst of all of that, managed to keep their guys. That was the most important thing to take away from this. That even in the midst of all of that, they just needed to do everything they could to make sure that they maintain their key acquisitions in this offseason. And with these moves, they won't have to move on from either one of them. The fact that this could potentially happen should be great enough news for any Suns fan out there, as it would be made known last week, according to Shams Charania, that the Suns were trying to buy out Bradley Beal's contract. I guess he just continues to refuse to waive his no trade clause at this point. But I guess that is another very loud way you can get him off of your team. Like, any way you can get that done at this point is of benefit to you. You just gotta make it happen. And I guess in terms of doing so, it would kind of be the same wave and stretch tactic that the Bucks would use to get Miles Turner. But in this case, they would just be cutting him. It's not going to work like a trade. At least it doesn't look that way now. And he also has to give them back like around $13 million as well to kind of engineer the entire thing. So this could be a process that does boil over, because it still hasn't been made clear whether this is coming from the Suns' volition and they just want to buy him out, or whether Bradley Beal wants to be bought out. I guess who exactly is signing off on that, again, hasn't really been identified just yet. And I mean, I don't know. Like, in the prospects of moving on from Bradley Beal potentially, it does clear up the logjam to an extent, because now you can allow a younger player with more promise at this stage of his career in Jalen Green to fully flourish in this roster. Like, again, he's got some of the same consistency problems as Bradley Beal does. But you wouldn't want him to develop his game. You'd rather him continue to sit under Bradley Beal and learn from him? No, he's got to go out there and experience it for himself. That's only right. Like, Bradley Beal has certainly had his moments of putting up the empty stats. You gotta at least allow Jalen Green to usher in the next few years of Suns basketball. As for Bradley Beal in this, and how he could potentially be affected, again, I still don't know what team would exactly want him. But apparently, and I'll detail that in a second, there could be something in line for him. The Bucks yesterday would re-sign backup point guard Ryan Rollins to a 3-year, $12 million deal. Again, this is kind of a similar, sentiment here. In waiving and stretching Damian Lillard's contract, you have to do everything you can if you're the Bucks to bring along your younger point guards. And Ryan Rollins at this point would be one of them. He's currently 23 years old, and he did get the most playing time he's ever gotten last season, putting up career highs across the board in games played with 56 and games started with 19, and in points per game with 6.2, along with total assists and rebounds with 1.9 each on 48.7% shooting from the field and 40.8% shooting from deep. Without having Damian Lillard there and being in need of a true point guard, I would expect Ryan Rollins, honestly, to become a little more of a six-man at times. Because I'm sure under this system, you're going to have games where you want Kevin Porter Jr. assuming that role. And you may stick with the hot hand. You might flow with him in the starting lineup at one point, or as a six-man for a few games in the season, and then switch over to Ryan Rollins if there's a shift in overall production. But, after being buried on the Warriors lineup for that much time, and also spending a brief portion of his career in downtrodden DC, to find this home in Milwaukee and at least be there for the next 3 years, with a chance to increase his value on a year-to-year basis, should pay dividends for him. It really comes down to what he will do with it. But there's a grand opportunity for him, and I do not believe that he'll let it pass him by. You have to put in as much effort as possible, and if he can do that, well, the Bucks might be set for at least the next few years at that position if he does develop nicely. There would be a 3-team trade yesterday that involved the Clippers, the Jazz, and the Heat. In this, the Clippers would trade Norman Powell to the Heat in a 2027 second rounder to Utah. The Heat would then trade Kevin Love and Kyle Anderson to the Jazz, while Utah would trade John Collins to Los Angeles. So, I guess I will look at this from the standpoint of what the Heat acquired first. To get Norman Powell in this deal, as I said when this initially happened, and after thinking about it for some time, the scoring punch there with him and Tyler Hero is going to pay dividends for them. Now, is he a little bit on the older side at 32? Yes. But this man just had a career year with the Clippers, starting in 60 games last season and putting up 21.8 points per game on 48.4% shooting from the field and 41.8% shooting from deep. Even if that's a dip in production from last season, he is still a career 39.8% shooter from the three. And the Heat, outside of Tyler Hero, have mostly struggled from range all season long. So to have that added boost there from him is great. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this move, in my opinion, when it comes to trying to bring your offense together. And I guess the only downside to that on the offensive end would be that he's not that good of a playmaker. And Tyler Hero, while he did have a few games last season where he had no choice but to tap into it and did have some double-digit assist ball games, that's not a strength of his either. So to have both of them consistently handling the ball and looking to shoot rather than leading the entire offense as a team could hurt them in some cases if they don't get that figured out. My main gripe with this would be on the defensive side. Throughout the season, and especially in that series against the Nuggets, let's just say that Norman Powell continued to get exploited on that side of the ball. And it continued to be a negative for the team on the defensive side pretty much every single minute he was on the court at that point. Realizing that Norman Powell could start in this system, and given that they've already had those problems with guys like Terry Rozier III and others in terms of being able to guard the other man on defense, it doesn't really seem like Norman Powell is going to be able to shore up on that side of the ball at this point. At 32 years old, is there really going to be any room for him to improve that aspect of his game? Is he going to be willing to? And you also need that same progression from Tyler Hero. That is a horrible defensive backcourt on paper. Let's just call it what it is. Like, teams are going to be salivating at the mouth waiting to go up against the Heat because they know they're just going to have their way with them on offense. It's not even funny. Like, that's just how it's going to go at this point. Unless they display great progression in the offseason when it comes to training for those parts of the game. But also, too, the Heat, I guess, to look at them trading away both Kevin Love and Kyle Anderson to Utah, both of them are older forwards who, in some games, were played out of the rotation. I mean, they got Kyle Anderson at the trade deadline, and, you know, he appeared in just 25 games. He did also shoot 49.3% from the field and 33.3% from deep, but even with what he can give you defensively at this stage of his career, man, they can call him slow-mo all they want to, but that shit is legitimately just rough to watch. And it can hurt his teams at times. Because in a day and age where pace is the name of the game, he actively hinders it when he's on the court. Like, even if it's crazy to see sometimes that he just moves like this, it legitimately slows his teams down as a whole. Like, when he's got the ball in his hands, there were multiple sequences like that with, honestly, both the Heat and the Warriors last season, where he just gets the ball in his hands and the clock is winding down and he doesn't make a good enough read or play in time to where he ends up taking the shot. That shit shouldn't be happening. And again, that's a testament to just how terrible things really were in the Heat organization last season. For Kevin Love as well, he has also just aged. It's as simple as that. He has gone through a tremendous amount of aging. Like, there's no question about it. I mean, in every single one of these seasons, he's just gotten phased out of the lineup. Like, how do you go from playing 55 games last season to just 23 in the 24-25 season. And even when he was out there, I mean, they mostly asked him to space the floor. You know, he did shoot 35.8% from the field from deep, but just shot 35.7% from the field on 5 attempts. So I really don't know what Utah would be claiming these guys for then. I do question that. It's like, you know, why exactly, if you are the Jazz trying to get younger, why do you first take on Yusuf Nurkic and then take on Kyle Anderson and Kevin Love? Now, Kyle Anderson might get himself a chance. You know, he's a very great defender to learn from when it comes to some of the younger wings that they have on their roster. And to pair him up at times alongside Lauri Markkanen and help him defensively as well, because even with Lauri Markkanen's frame, he's very weak on the defensive side of the ball. That's well known. That could help them immediately. They would need that sort of veteran presence in there. But again, Kevin Love at this point is unplayable and would see spot minutes at a time now on a team filled with younger talent. Now again, to learn from him, if you're some of these other centers and power forwards, couldn't really hurt, but at the same time, why are you taking on all these older assets that aren't going to be of true benefit to your team, knowing that your plan is to continue the rebuild and develop as much young talent as you can? I just don't get it. Like, that is just such a contradictory move. Like, come on now. As for John Collins going to Los Angeles, I mean, shit, I just brought up Lauri Markkanen, so I'll just say this right now, because it's been a while since I've covered Utah, right? I know good and damn well that this man's injury he suffered last season could not have been as bad as it was. Like, he did end up getting injured after this game against the Bulls. But I had a feeling that he was more than ready to return by at least the last few games of the season. By that point, the Jazz were already one of the worst teams in the league. But you could tell at that point that if they weren't going to allow Lauri Markkanen to return to the starting lineup after all this time, they were clearly trying to do as best as they could to take their value and get up high in the draft order. And they still failed because they ended up getting the 5th overall pick. It just sucks to see that they would resort to tactics like this, but it does make sense for them. Nonetheless, when you are in a spot where you're doing this, it's inevitably going to hurt the player. At least in most cases it does. And John Collins suffered pretty much the same thing. Now, he is a little younger than Lauri Markkanen at this point, but he's still in the prime of his career. And, you know, his time in Atlanta did come to an uneventful end that saw him reach, I guess, not rock bottom, but he had some of the worst production in his overall career. So they sent that man to basketball hell in Utah. But he had a solid first season with them, all things considered. And then you get to this 24-25 season. Again, similar thing, where the production was there. This man shot 39.9% from the field, from deep rather, which is a career high for him, and he also averaged 19 points per game and 8.2 rebounds with 2 assists per game, but played in just 40. Like, that smells so fishy. That's terrible. Like, he's producing at that level the second best averages of his career in terms of points per game, and one of the more elite marks from deep he's had. And you have multiple games in there where, yeah, he had a few injuries, but he logged multiple DNPs and was just taken out of games completely for the sole purpose of giving the young guys space to play, and also inadvertently hiking up their value in terms of the potential draft order. Just sweetening the pot as best as they could, with him doing this in just 40 games. Like, he was a net positive every single time he was on the court for them. And yet they saw that and they were just like, okay, we're going to pull him out of the lineup. We're not even going to let him play. So, in turn, you only get a second round pick for him in 2027. When in reality, even with John Collins doing this, because Larry Markkinen had his all-star season and they still did not contend for the playoffs. If I'm the Jazz, I would have just let John Collins play, hike up his value, and try to poach even better draft capital from the Clippers. At the same time, they themselves are depleted. So at least you come away with something for John Collins. But for the Clippers to get a man in him who's doing this right now, and having lost a guy like Norman Powell, that isn't a terrible trade-off at all. I mean, John Collins, especially with what he was doing on the Hawks, on a more national scale as well, because the Jazz weren't getting nationally televised like that. He's been a very diverse player. You know, if you needed him to play the 3-and-D role, he could do that. If you needed him to be a lob threat, we know he can do that. He just brings another dynamic element to this Clippers roster. And could you just imagine pick and rolls involving him and James Harden? Damn, bro. Like, he, right away, honestly, given how their roster looks, he'd be a starter. You know, Derrick Jones Jr., to have him come off the bench as well and provide you with some of the same things on a lesser scale. But still, that's scary. Like, that is tremendous depth for their roster. Batum is going to be a bench guy at this point as well. Kobe Brown is a bench guy. Jordan Miller's a bench guy also. And we don't talk about Ben Simmons. But yeah, to get a similar level of scoring here back for a player that had one of his better seasons in the league, and knowing that you have that combination of youth, athleticism, and defense all in one player with John Collins, when adding him to this roster, is totally beneficial to them. So I honestly can't wait to see what that looks like. Like, I'm fully for it. The Suns, with all the news that they've recently had, would sign Devin Booker to a 2-year, $150 million deal yesterday, making him the highest paid NBA player ever in terms of average salary per year. And it makes sense. I mean, it has been nothing short of just a dumpster fire in Phoenix for all this time. Everything that could have gone wrong for them has gone wrong for them. Naturally, it does start with Ishbia trying to run the fastest gauntlet to ruin a team ever by instantly coming in and making some of the boldest moves known to man. And they all backfired to an extent. And right in the middle of it all has been Devin Booker. Just continuing to produce in the best ways he can. Whether he's asked to score, whether he's been asked to step outside of his normal element and play make even, he's done it. And last year, he had another season averaging 25.6 points per game, while also averaging a career high 7.1 assists. He shot 46.1% from the field, and also shot 33.2% from deep. But with everything going on surrounding the likes of Bradley Beal, getting Jalen Green, getting Dillon Brooks in that locker room, the noise was growing a little bit louder, at least on the outside. There were chances. There were legitimate conversations about him potentially being traded. And again, as I was stating in reports leading up to this, you could not, under any circumstances, trade Devin Booker if you didn't have to. If there was an offer that you couldn't refuse in exploring your options, fine. But you needed to do everything you could to make sure that Devin Booker stayed there. That is the face of your franchise. Even when you got Chris Paul in 2021 to pair up alongside him, it was still Devin Booker's franchise. Even when you got Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal to come in and that ultimately failed, it's been Devin Booker's franchise. He has been there with this organization through thick and thin. The mid-2010s, Phoenix Suns were some of the worst teams in NBA history and were, with what we know now about Robert Sarver's bitch ass, a very poorly run organization. Yet he's been there through it all. You couldn't let this moment in time make you move on from him now. So they at least have the space to afford it now with, potentially moving on from Bradley Beal and having a bit of space cleared up after moving on from Kevin Durant. While it's a steep amount of money, again, nobody has reached that kind of average salary per year just yet. It's steep for a team that still may not contend at all this season. But at the very least, you keep Devin Booker around. That had to happen. That needed to happen for you. Simply put. Yesterday, the Magic would sign Paolo Banchero to a 5-year, $239.25 million rookie contract max extension. And depending on if he can win either the MVP or Defensive Player of the Year award next season, or make an All-NBA appearance, which he has never done before in his career, that number could balloon up to an astounding $287 million. But again, the initial guarantee is pretty standard at this point. Again, I was kind of taken aback by it because it looked crazy. But at the same time, with the rights continuing to kick in on a season-by-season basis, those numbers are bound to skyrocket. And eventually, when it's time for other rookies around the league in this stretch of time to get their own contracts, those numbers that you see on these deals will tend to balance out more often than not. Now, this is the thing I will say for Paolo Banchero. Now, he did have a career high in overall production last season. 25.9 points per game on 45.2% shooting with 7.5 rebounds, 4.8 assists on the average per game, and also he shot 32% from the field. Those are great numbers. And you could tell in just the first few games of the season, the very first 5 to be exact, that he was going to be in for something special. I mean, he had 3 30-point games in this time, including a then career high, I think still a career high now, of 50. And yet, injuries crept up on him so very early. Like, he would proceed to miss the next 34 ball games consecutively. He had one of the better seasons, and yet he could not capitalize on that with an all-star nod, because at that point, nobody had seen enough from him. He came back and he still performed fine. There were a few struggle games mixed in here, but the production was always going to be there. The skill was going to be there for him. He just couldn't display that for a full season, and that's going to be the question here when it comes to granting him a contract like this. Now, granted, he was due for it at some point in this offseason or the next one. It's better for teams in this day and age where the market continues to fluctuate to get ahead of the curve in some cases when you know that you have a sure thing. And I guess to that extent, they do heavily trust in Banchero. I will say that injuries are always going to be a question. And, to see him miss that many games in a row could be alarming. But at the same time, Banchero in the first 2 seasons of his career played 152 combined games out of a possible 164 in the regular season, while winning Rookie of the Year in 2023 and also making an All-Star appearance last season. So, you're hoping, if you are the Orlando Magic front office, that this season was an outlier in terms of a long-term injury like that. You do not hope that this is a pattern, as I've said, relating to multiple players getting their contract extensions during this time. Like, that's just always something you have to caution. But outside of that, it is perfect. You just want to see Paolo Banchero take the next step in terms of being able to shoot the 3-ball. He has at least come around in the mid-range. He can get you the occasional one when he's in the post, as they tried to grant him those touches at multiple points in the regular season and the playoffs. He can do it when he's coming off the pick and roll. He can spot up for a few. He still can't shoot the 3-ball that well. And it's going to add another dimension to his game, if he can do it. That was a criticism of sorts that has been following him for pretty much his entire career since getting out of college in the first place. He's definitely going to need to work on that. I will say that. And the team as a whole, they desperately need that element of shooting on their roster. And, they have to make it come from within. You can't, like, Desmond Bane should help things along for sure. But the greatest impact is going to come from that internal development. So Banchero and Wagner, whenever he's due for his contract, as I mentioned earlier, they got to recognize that. They got to get in the lab and work on that shit. Because again, in this day and age, you're not going to consistently get away with shooting, like, I think they had a game as low as like 19% from deep. You're not going to get away with too many games like that. You have got to improve as a roster on that front, or you're just going to continue to suffer defeat. The 76ers would re-sign Kyle Lowry to a 1-year deal. I didn't even know they were on the market to re-sign him. But let's just look at this for what it is, because he is another player who has aged. He's going to be 40 next season, for crying out loud. So his role is going to consistently decrease. We know that. He played in just 35 games last season. So we understand that. But as a mentor to so many young guards coming through that system now, whether it be the likes of Tyrese Maxey or Jared McCain or now VJ Edgecombe, this is one of the greatest individuals you can learn from here. Like, we're talking about a player who was definitely counted out when he first got drafted, and then becoming an early journeyman in his NBA career, onto then in Toronto becoming a legitimate all-star and one of the best guards in the league before helping lead the Raptors to their first ever title. And then going through the peaks and valleys of an NBA career once again, and seeing his role decrease season by season in Miami, before eventually moving on to Philly. Like, any number of events that these young guards think they'll face, Kyle Lowry has probably been through it before. So there is certainly so much room for potential advice he will be able to grant them. And there will be games as well where he'll be called upon to, lead the second unit. And I think he has always been a very solid player when it comes to facilitating. So that shouldn't be too much to ask for him. But wow. That is just, it's surprising to me. But honestly, it makes sense. He's a hometown kid. This could very well be his last stand. So, there's not really any sort of negative that comes with a deal like that. And the Pacers would yesterday reacquire James Wiseman on a 2-year deal. Now, yes, last year they did have him. And they did trade him to the Raptors, who then waived him at the trade deadline. Like, the fact that that man only played in 1 game last season is just so underwhelming. And that has been the story of his career. I shit you not. Like, he has not been truly available outside of the 23-24 season with Detroit, where he played in 63 games, but even then, with him actively playing, the Pistons were the worst team in the league and at a point in NBA history. And so this is why I say as well that in the event of them moving on from Tony Bradley and Thomas Bryant, there's a chance that Jay Huff could start. Which, again, with his durability issues, don't show a lot of promise in that. But he has produced much better than James Wiseman has. So, like, the Pacers are definitely taking some chances here by reacquiring him. Whether he starts or whether he's on the bench, he's going to have a key role as a center on this roster because they don't have any other ones at this moment. At least we don't know. And, in losing Miles Turner, you gotta try to fill those gaps in ways that conserve money while not crossing the luxury tax threshold at all or the second apron. You're trying to avoid that. So making these minimal moves is ideal for you in that sense. But neither of them, Wiseman or Huff, are durable enough to suggest legitimate rotational minutes. I don't know. Like, again, Wiseman is still much younger than Huff is. Like, don't get me wrong, it's been a terrible career for him so far. It has been bad. But what more could we have expected from a player who played just 3 games in college? Like, of course his career was going to get off to a rough start. But, with him being drafted at his position, I guess in this case, the opportunity arose for him to at least get another chance, and it was looking bleak. Again, literally just playing one game, getting hurt, getting cut, and then getting traded and then getting waived. I thought his career was going to be done. I said as such in the recap corresponding with that development. I stated that loud and clear. There's a chance I could be proven wrong, though. I would love to see him prove me wrong. Like, that would be great to see him turn this thing around. It's a perfect opportunity. He really has to harness those elements of talent and hone into his skills, though. That is exactly what it's going to take. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.